Most people don't make it through their spiritual awakening, not because it physically ends them, but because it exposes something so raw, so real, so untamed that the personality they've carefully built over a lifetime collapses. They retreat. They numb themselves. They return to the comfort of illusion. Because truth, genuine truth, doesn't free you at first. It breaks you. It shatters the illusions you carried, the stories you believed, and the masks you wore so long they became part of you. This is the part rarely spoken about. The part missing from the romanticized image of enlightenment. The silent scream, the inner death, the quake of the soul that leaves you trembling in a world that no longer feels familiar. People say awakening is light, but that's only half of it. The other half is shadow, and the moment the veil lifts, the world begins to dissolve. Not physically, but in meaning. Everything you thought you knew loses its weight. Who you believed you were crumbles. Your gods, your beliefs, your ambitions, suddenly they echo hollow in a chamber you can no longer remain inside. This is what Carl Jung pointed to when he said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain, because awakening doesn't arrive as comfort. It comes as crisis. It begins the moment the life you built starts to feel false. Not an intentional falsehood, but a protective one. A framework to shield you from truths you weren't ready to face. But now, something within you is ready. Something ancient, sacred, and irreversibly alive. And once awakened, it will not let you sleep in the same way again. The dreams you once chased now seem foreign. The people you once connected with feel distant. The pleasures you once sought leave you empty. And what remains is silence. A silence so loud, it drowns out the voice you once called yourself. This is ego death. Not a metaphor, but the genuine psychological death of identity. If you resist it, the pain deepens. If you fight it, it feels like madness. If you surrender, it still tears you apart. But within that tearing, you glimpse something eternal. This is why so many do not endure it. Because the old self does not leave quietly. It clings, it argues, it bargains. It tells you what you feel isn't real, that you're broken, lost, or delusional. And maybe you are, but only because the map you were given was never meant to guide you back to yourself. You were taught how to succeed, how to conform, how to fit in, but not how to be authentic, not how to descend, not how to fall inward and listen to the soul beneath the mask. And so the descent feels like destruction. Yet in truth, it is an initiation, a sacred invitation, a spiral into the womb of your own becoming. You will be asked to release, to let go of everything that isn't real, every label, every mask, every borrowed identity. You will lose things. You will lose people. You will lose versions of yourself you thought were permanent. You must allow people to go. Holding on, or trying to pull them into a higher state, will only cause decay in your hands. Awakening doesn't improve your old life. It destroys it completely, leaving only ashes, waiting to see if something new can rise. Yet most turn back. They prefer comfort over truth, recognition over authenticity, and a familiar prison over the uncertainty of freedom. The unknown wilderness feels frightening. It speaks a language beyond logic, asking you to feel, to remain, and to face the reflection that reveals what you tried to hide. This reflection shows your shadow, not as an enemy, but as a forgotten part of you longing to return. The part that was angry, that wept, that controlled, feared, manipulated, or survived without love. True awakening requires you to welcome this shadow, to sit with it and respond not with fear, but with compassion. Yet the shadow does not speak gently. It speaks through triggers, pain, and projections. It shows itself in your jealousy, defensiveness, addictions, and the ways you sabotage what you desire most. Until you turn toward it, you remain trapped in repetition. Awakening is not the end of suffering, but the beginning of meeting it directly, with honesty and courage. This is why so few continue the journey. Awakening asks for all of you, your grief, your rage, your silence, and your willingness to be remade without knowing who you will become. It asks you to die while still alive, to lose your mind, to rediscover your soul, to watch your old structures collapse and still say yes. In that yes, everything begins. The descent does not demand strength, but surrender. That is what frightens the ego most, because the ego is built on control of thought, of emotion, of story. It was designed for survival in a world that punishes vulnerability. But the soul has no interest in survival. It came to evolve, and growth requires dismantling. You must let go of the armor, the stories, and the scaffolding that shaped your identity. Only then can something genuine appear, not born of fear but of essence. This essence does not shout or demand. It waits for the noise to fade, for the masks to fall, for the mind to tire of its own illusions. Then it speaks, not in words, but in a deep ache. An ache for something more, not more approval or success, but more authenticity, wholeness, and aliveness. This ache is not error, not illness, not weakness. It is the signal that you are ready to step beyond falsehood. But here is the reality. Most people hear the call and ignore it. They bury it with achievements, drown it with distractions, and numb it with routines. Because to answer means letting go of a world built on sand, and no one tells you how isolating that can be. The first stage of awakening is not beauty, it is exile. Exile from the familiar. Exile from the socially accepted version of yourself. Exile from the system of validation you never realized you depended on. And in that exile you will long to return. You will crave the numbness, the predictability, the safety of pretending. But something inside will not allow it anymore. Because once you have glimpsed truth, you cannot unknow it. Once you have felt the weight of your own soul, you cannot go back to the surface. And so you drift through sleepless nights, through mornings filled with unexplained tears, through relationships that suddenly feel empty, even when no one has done anything wrong. This is the space between selves. The cocoon, the void, the threshold where the old has ended but the new has yet to begin. It is frightening. It is sacred. And it is here that the soul begins its deepest work. In this place, the shadow draws near. No longer willing to be ignored, it shows itself in every trigger, every reaction, every unhealed wound, rising like a cry from within. And you want to run. Naturally you do. You were taught to run from pain, to repair it, to cover it with spiritual words and positive thoughts. But awakening is not avoidance. It is a direct encounter. It is facing the mirror of your own fragmentation without turning away. You are not asked to escape the pain. You are asked to meet it, sit with it, feel it, and allow it to teach you what comfort never could. Slowly you begin to see the pain was never your enemy. It was the opening, the break in the shell, the fracture through which light could enter. You begin to recognize that anger, sadness, and fear were never broken parts. They were hidden messengers, each carrying a fragment of your truth, and as you listen, you soften. You begin to feel something long forgotten, perhaps never felt at all: compassion. Not just for others, but for yourself. For the child in you who was never held. For the teenager who built armor to survive. For the adult who mistook productivity for purpose. You see it all now with tenderness, with the kind of grace that only rises from the ashes of self-abandonment. And in that grace, something changes. You no longer need to perform. You no longer need to be perfect. You no longer need to be healed. You realize awakening was never about becoming better. It was about becoming truthful. Truthful about the mess, the beauty, the paradox of being human, divine and afraid, eternal and fragile, limitless and scarred. Somehow, honesty becomes the ground beneath you. Not confidence, not certainty, just truth. You no longer feel the need to prove who you are. You no longer force yourself into spaces that dim your light. You no longer trade away your truth for a false sense of safety. Because now you know the safety lies within you. Not because every answer is clear, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself in the hardest places. You've stopped running, and that changes everything. This is the place most people never reach. Not because they lack strength, but because no one taught them how to stay. To stay in discomfort, to stay in uncertainty, to stay with the soul until it speaks. But you are staying, and in staying, you are becoming something real. Not flawless, not polished, but grounded, aligned, and fully alive. That is the beginning of becoming unbreakable. You start to see how much of your life was built on borrowed dreams, dreams shaped by culture, by fear, by generations who only knew survival, not wholeness. And survival always demands you shrink. It asks you to wear masks, trade truth for approval, bury your needs and hunger under a smile that hides the pain. But you're no longer surviving, you're awakening, and with awakening comes a sacred rage. A deep and holy anger at the lies, the roles, the betrayals of self you once accepted just to belong. That rage is not regression, it's resurrection. It's the part of you that remembers you were never meant to live asleep. Your voice shifts, not louder but clearer. You say no without guilt, yes without excuses. You stop apologizing for being whole. And the world struggles with this version of you. It trained you to fit in, to blend, to obey. But now you are a frequency it cannot predict, a truth it cannot twist, a presence that exposes the unconscious in others simply by existing. This is embodiment. Not talking about awakening, not posting about healing, but living it, breathing it in every unguarded moment. And it isn't glamorous. It isn't always poetic. Sometimes it's crying alone in your car as your nervous system rewrites itself. Sometimes it's losing people you thought were forever because your truth grew louder than their silence. Sometimes it's grieving a life you built with love because it was built by a version of you that no longer exists. This is the cost of becoming. You lose more than illusions. You lose identities. You lose comfort. You lose the scaffolding that once held you together, but now keeps you stuck. And what replaces it isn't immediate, certain, or neat. It's a void, a vast, holy emptiness where the old no longer fits, and the new hasn't yet arrived. You wake not knowing who you are. You move through the world feeling both ancient and newborn. You try to speak, but language feels too small. You try to plan, but the future laughs, because this space is not for building. It's for listening. Listening to the quiet beneath the noise. The whisper that says, let go. Let go of the timeline. Let go of the blueprint. Release the need to define what all of this means. Allow it to shape you, to refine you, to reveal what remains when there is nothing left to guard. What stays is real. Not your image, not your performance, not the polished identity you carried like armor. What remains is breath, presence, the quiet rhythm of simply being alive without proving it, and in that stillness you meet yourself. Not the self you hope to become, but the self who has always been here. The untamed, the scarred, the one who remembers why you came before the world taught you to forget. You no longer chase purpose. You live it in the way you move, the way you speak, the way you stay gentle when life insists you harden. You stop climbing for meaning as if it were a ladder. Instead, you embody meaning in how you walk, how you love, and how you refuse to abandon your soul when the world grows dark. This is the deeper stage of awakening, a stage no one truly prepares you for, not because it is hidden, but because it cannot be taught. It must be lived. It is not a final destination, not a mountaintop achievement. It is a rhythm, a return, a remembering of the self beneath the shadows, the self before conditioning, the self beyond the story. And when you live from that place, not just visit, but fully live, everything shifts. Not overnight, not dramatically, but undeniably. Life grows quieter yet richer. You stop explaining yourself to those who never listened. You stop giving your intuition away to experts and systems. You stop betraying what you know deep inside just to be accepted. And then something unexpected happens. You stop searching for love because you realize you are love. You are what you've been seeking. Not in the mirror, not in others, not in the future, but here, now, within. You begin to trust that a life aligned with your truth will reveal itself in time. That what falls away was never meant for you, and what stays will meet you in this deeper frequency. You no longer rush your becoming. You no longer beg for clarity. You no longer fear the unknown, because the unknown begins to feel like home. From surviving the collapse of the soul, a new kind of strength is born. Not loud, not for display, not the kind the world praises. It is quiet, sovereign, the strength of someone who knows who they are without needing to be seen. Because once you have released everything false, what remains cannot be shaken. Not because it never breaks, but because it has broken and returned in a deeper form. You no longer move through life looking for proof that you matter. You walk as proof. Proof to your own soul, to the part of you that remembers the cost of reclaiming your voice, of walking alone, of burning illusions, just to feel real again. This kind of strength isn't formed in a single moment. It's shaped through challenge, in the trembling before truth, in the nights you thought you wouldn't endure. And now survival isn't the goal anymore. Now it's about living in truth. Life feels simpler today, not because it became easy, but because you stopped wasting energy on being someone you're not. You no longer seek relationships out of fear of loneliness. You no longer trade your time for approval. You no longer hide your depth for acceptance. You've met yourself too deeply to pretend again. What once seemed like exile, unraveling, or silence now feels like grace. Because it led you here, to this stillness, to this clarity, to this inner refuge that nothing external can give or take away. You observe others rushing, performing, longing to belong, chasing meaning like shadows. And you don't judge, because you've been there. You still carry the scar, but you also carry the light. Not a light that blinds, but one that guides. A light that says you can stop running now. You can feel. You can return to yourself. Some will recognize in you what they've been yearning to rediscover in themselves. Some won't, and that's okay. Because your role is no longer to wake others. Your role is to remain awake, grounded, open, and real. This is the quiet revolution. It's not about fighting the system, but refusing to feed it your energy. Not about preaching change, but embodying what cannot be denied. Your presence itself becomes a mirror. Not one that flatters, but one that reflects. Some will resist it, others will awaken through it. But it isn't your responsibility to manage their reflection. Your responsibility is to remain the mirror, to remain clear, to remain steady. This is how spiritual awakening transforms into strength, not through display, but through permanence. You become unmoved because you no longer live on the surface. You live from the source, from the self that was never truly gone, only hidden. And now you remember. You remember how to rest without guilt, how to feel without shame, how to speak without shrinking, how to walk the world without over-explaining, because your existence is no longer a question. It is an answer. You no longer ask, who should I be? You quietly affirm, I already am. This is the final threshold. Not about becoming more, but becoming yourself, fully, with the holy, the flawed, the divine, the broken, the healed, the unhealed, the becoming. All of it aloud. You no longer seek to escape the human experience. You are here to live it fully, consciously, and bravely. This is why you made it through your awakening. Not because you mastered it, not because you rose above it, but because you stayed. You stayed in the fire. You stayed through the breaking. You stayed through the emptiness. And in staying, you were remade, not into someone better, but into someone real. Now you carry something unspoken, a frequency, a remembering, a light that doesn't perform but simply exists. You move through the world, not searching for the next awakening, but living as one who is awakened. This is a place most never reach. Not because they can't, but because they turn back too soon. You didn't. You turned inward, you turned toward yourself, and you found home. So now, walk. Not to chase, but to radiate. Not to prove, but to be. And let the world feel what can only be felt in the presence of someone who has walked through fire and stayed.